Today, we're talking about the three motivations from the point of view of bodhicitta practices. Bodhicitta is awakened, bodhi, chitta, heart mind, or that connection. And frequently, Buddhists will point to their heart center as the residing location of their heart and their mind. They'll say the mind. So frequently, they'll say body as being up here because, maybe that's the mechanical, working of the body all stems from the brain area. Speech is the throat, which makes sense, and that's the expressive element of our emotions and our feelings. And then mind, they would say, is here. And I don't think that there's any discrepancy for most Buddhists, at least practicing Buddhists, particularly from Eastern cultures, that this is where the mind is. And that the mind and our feelings and our experiences and our somatic senses are all conjoined in the mind of wakefulness. So bodhicitta is this integrated mind. It's not just the mind that thinks, but it's the mind that feels, and beyond that, it's the mind that is, or just knows. We think about what intuition might be, or what real inspiration might be, the connection that we might have to our art or our creativity. But some of it is just part of our brain thinking out what the next logical step is in our painting or the next words in our writing. But some of it is a gift that just seems to come from the space. It's like when we're not locked in the logic of our brain, there is some kind of sense still of understanding. Sometimes someone that we meet beats all the criteria for a lover, but yet inside we know it's not right. Conversely, someone we meet might have none of the qualifications to be an appropriate lover, and yet we still fall in love. So there's a whole interesting aspect of our mind that is much bigger than the thing that we actually just reiterate the same old logics through. There's the experience in the body and the experience of our intuition and the experience of our emotions. And bodhicitta is the conjoined feeling of that. And it all gets simplified down to two elements, the idea of clarity or wisdom and the idea of compassion and kindness and caring. Wisdom and compassion as two inseparable things. Colors that are associated with that are blue for wisdom and red for compassion. This sense that these two things, sometimes considered masculine and feminine, not male and female, but sort of assertive energy of one and the open and clear energy of the other on some level. So you have this sense of the openness of space and the warmth of the radiance of the sun within that. Big blue open sky and the warm radiant sun within that, so to speak. That's kind of an image of bodhicitta. Last class, we talked about the three motivations. The first one being the motivation to just make ourselves feel better, self-help, so to speak, which is what a lot of meditation, when we see it online or in print, is really like that. It's become a modern fad, really, to talk about meditation and talk about mindfulness and have no real idea of what kind of technique you'd use, but just the idea that you'd fit better in your yoga pants if you were to employ this practice in your life. You'd attract more awake people to your world. There's any number of materialistic ways that people are motivated to do the meditation practice, and I definitely don't poo-poo any of that. I believe that really we could all be a little bit less judgmental and just more accepting and open altogether. And the first level of motivation might be just to make ourselves feel better or to become more connected, attracted to people that are caring and kind instead of the same aggressive, competitive world that we might normally live in. We might use that first level of motivation when we feel really badly and we don't want to meditate at all. I think the beginning of your meditation, when you're just starting out or when you're restarting out, rather than being heavy handed, I would go the other extreme and be absolutely kind, supportive, and loving with yourself. I recommend, if the idea is to make yourself feel better, is not to beat yourself up to feel better, but to actually employ this sense of kindness and love for yourself. And as I said, for some people, when they become conscious of loving themselves, that becomes a blockage, that becomes something that we're shy about, or we become, you know, fearful of in a way, you know. So rather than that, we maybe could just put ourselves in situations that create that kindness for us, like a yoga class or sitting by a river. Anything that isn't promoting materialism, competitiveness, aggressiveness in our world, but actually creating a connection. And here's an important word we're going to use all the way through the talk: connection. Connection to the natural order of things. A good walk outside in the world. A good, longing embrace of a tree. Sitting beside a river. Actually allowing yourself to walk barefoot in the grass, just being part of the world, putting yourself in conjunction that you could connect to another person. That's something that could be very healing, but it also could be provoking in ways that create more drama, which is not very settling. So this first stage is about settling the mind and allowing its natural clarity to dawn so that we can begin to feel that sense of loving kindness. And despite where else you might have heard loving kindness from in other literature, the loving kindness that is associated with Buddhist practice is a specific level of warmth in the heart, a radiance that could be translated as a smile. And it's about acceptance. And it's considered to be the first level of compassion, because if we can't begin with just a simple smile, then the deep love that maybe would follow is harder to accomplish. Also, I think the simplicity of smiling, the simplicity of accepting oneself, the simplicity of just allowing ourselves to be friendly with not only ourselves, but with our difficult emotions, to find a friendliness with our fear and a friendliness to our depression. That we actually find a way to become familiar with these things so we begin to gain a little bit of control, or agencies, maybe a better word, because it's not about controlling, but that we actually have more credibility to our frightened mind. We become the leader of our own mind because our ability to smile diminishes all the drama in our head. When we are pressured and have a lot of drama and difficulty, we feel like we should have an extraordinarily, equally demanding and dramatic response. Like that the remedy should be as heavy as the affliction. Often the remedy is more damaging than the affliction. I think you've experienced that, we all have. This is about diminishing all the aggression. I went to a teacher once and I was struggling with my practice. I was trying to do a series of Tibetan Buddhist meditation practices called Nundro, which are very challenging and very physical. I was doing literally prostrations, throwing myself down on the ground. And we're supposed to do 100,000 of those for this one cycle. which is ridiculous. It's so hard to translate that to my regular life. How do you actually talk to anyone around? What are you doing today? Throwing myself down on the ground 1,000 times, I hope, so I can get 100,000 done before I die. It just seemed overwhelming to me and impossible for me, and I struggled. I felt embarrassed that I was having a hard time. I felt like I was letting down my teacher, my meditation community. I felt all this aggression, like any of the stuff that we feel, when we are really not connected to ourselves, when we really are struggling with something that we actually are finding it difficult to do. And instead of loving kindness and encouraging the situation, I was arguing and beating myself up. And I went to this teacher, Zigar Control, and explained that whole story to him. And he looked at me and he just smiled and said, just relax and stop struggling. And I was so irritated. I was just like beside myself. And I went out and at lunch break, I was complaining, oh, just relax. Easy for him to say. And I like, it just wasn't the heavy answer I wanted. So I figured I would rephrase the question. And the next session, I asked the question again, this time rephrase, trying to catch him into a better, more, responsive action. And of course, what did he say? Relax, stop struggling. And I got even more upset. Finally, in my private interview with him, which he did with everyone in his practice, I explained to him, I said, I got so upset and blah, 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 blah. And I got all worked up. And he smiled at me and he said, and we both said it together. We said, relax, stop struggling. And I realized the whole point was not to figure out how to stop struggling, but just to freaking stop struggling. Not that there's no right or wrong. There's no right way to do it. If I practice, if I don't practice, if I fail the entire lineage, if I get booted out of Buddhism altogether, none of that matters. What matters is how I treat myself. And beating myself up and squeezing myself in a small ball of self-recrimination was not relaxing. And it was not giving up the struggle. It was creating a struggle. Oh, that was amazing. I do it all the time and I see it all the time. I get upset and then I start complicating things and I build things up in my mind. And before you know, I'm fighting with my own brain and arguing in my own head. And I have to remember, just let go. Stop the struggle. The answer isn't to meet aggression with more aggression. The answer is to meet aggression with a smile, calm. You can go further, but we can't go anywhere until we begin with coming back to the ground of just self-acceptance, just complete acceptance. And if we could accept and can join that with just a sense of affection and kindness for ourselves, that's loving kindness. It's the first step to compassion, and we can't help other people until we could feel that affection for ourselves and until we could release the struggle. The second step is the step of really beginning to make a commitment in our mind to do this practice for the rest of our lives every day. Not just to feel better, but to become richer and deeper and more connected human beings. More connected to what? More connected to ourselves, more connected to our world, more connected to our life. And we can't just do that on the weekends. That has to be like every morning we wake up and we reset our intention to become kinder and more gentle people. That second level of motivation, which is the great motivation, which is the motivation toward enlightenment, or in this case, toward bodhicitta, the enlightened heart mind. That we're actually developing our compassion for ourselves, not just smiling. Okay, so if that wasn't enough for you and you're going, oh yeah, just smile, that's where we start. The next level is to begin to really feel into our experience and bring the smile to that. to be willing to look at our depression, to be willing to look at our anger, to be willing to look at our addictions, to be willing to look at the ways we limit ourselves, we keep ourselves from what we want in our life, to be looking at how a lot of what we blame on the world is basically stuff that we're doing to our world. Really beginning to look at who we are and how we could begin to unlock some of the mysteries of who that is and deepen our experience into love. And that is real, the dawning of compassion, because we're actually looking into the pain. It's not just the smile now. The other side of that coin is then now looking into the pain and the suffering and to being able to accept that, acknowledge that, be with that. If we can connect to our suffering, it becomes really clear, apparent, almost completely second nature to realize that we're connected to every being alive on the planet, any being that's ever been alive. We're connected to James Joyce. We're connected to Ulysses. We're connected to the Beat Poets. We're connected to rock and roll. We're connected to the world at large, because every human being that ever existed or ever will exist has suffered, has pain, has difficulty, and all of us want to be rid of that pain. It's something we all share. And we then can begin to connect to the greatest motivation, which is that our practice and our compassion is connecting us to the entire world, all around us, the universe. That every being in the universe suffers and every being wishes to be free of that suffering. And somebody that hurt you is not just somebody that randomly has hurt you. They're part of a cycle of suffering and they are themselves suffering. And people that hurt people are really suffering. This next real story, it'd be the last thing, is very outrageous, and I need to be a little brave to say it, but I was taken aback when I was a young student and I was sitting around a table at Shambhala Mountain Center, and we had the wood fire going. Those days, that was the source of heat in the common room. And one of the older students was reading the paper, and it turned out that somebody had murdered their girlfriend right down the road, had shot her in the chest, and he was being carted out by the police in the paper. This is in a tiny little town in Colorado, and we all felt the intensity of that pain. And in fact, the woman that was killed was a daughter of someone we all knew, and it was heartbreaking and shocking and just anger-provoking, because this guy was a drunk and he was aggressive and he was an abusive fellow who shot this beautiful woman. And the older student actually looked at that and said, he just did not know how to work with his pain. And that was his take on it. And I was immediately like freaked out. I was like, he should be fried. We should go to his house and burn his house down. You know, I had all these aggressive New York ideas of how we should administer justice. And you know, and I know that those are the very kinds of things that keep the wheel of aggression spinning around. People constantly wanting to make more things burn down by adding fire to fire instead of actually creating space. It's not even water to fire, because that's like a direct way of trying to get rid of it, but it's like creating a nice space for the fire to burn itself out. To understand that people create hardship and difficulty in life because they don't know how to work with their pain. They freak out about it. And some people can't even come close to it. They just lash out immediately, give it to you, thinking that it's going to make it better for them. The fact is, it doesn't make it better. It makes it worse for everybody. And the remedy is to take this loving kindness that began with acceptance and then went into compassion, real caring about our own pain, and begin to use that as a step of empathy to feel the pain of others, how can we make their world an easier place? And rather than fighting people that we think have created problems, why not see if we could love them in a way, love them enough for them to be able to find a way to work with their pain. And if we can't do it directly, which frequently you can't, it just isn't, practical. But in our heart, we don't have to continue with the aggression and the anger. We could actually begin to smile and care and actually do things to help rather than to hurt. So this isn't just smiling so that we don't have to get involved. This is like smiling and offering a hand or lending whatever we can. And we can't save everyone and we can't help everyone. And some people will upset us so badly we can't help them at all, and we have to forgive all of that. That's okay. That's what we're working on. But this path is continuous. It's daily. It's the rest of our life, trying to increase the boundaries that we have, allow ourselves to be more accepting, more open, more kind, more connected to our world. And I'll close with this idea that connectivity is now implicated a lot in recovery, particularly with substances. So people that are in addiction, one of the ways that they're being treated now is to try to be around other people, to find a connection with other people, to go to meetings, to go to groups, to share, to talk, because that actually calms the panic that creates the addictions. Well, I believe that's probably true of all of our neurosis and all of the things that create suffering and pain, that we actually learn to connect to other people. That's a way of healing that is estimable. Healing by opening our heart and connecting to other people. Conversely, a way of damaging ourselves further, a way of addicting further, is to isolate, is to cut ourselves off from people and get stuck in our heads so that we're in this world of self-obsession. That self-obsession is a killer, and we've all seen people do that, and we've all done it ourselves. It's so tedious, As soon as we can reach out and use our pain to connect to other people and learn to understand them, we're actually taking a step toward the final word in our talk is called the Bodhisattva, the awakened being. So bodhicitta becomes the being, the individual who's a bodhisattva. You become Gandhi, you become Martin Luther King, you become an imperfect, incomplete, tortured individual who's managed to work beyond their own pain to actually help people in the world, to actually benefit people. Thank you, and thank you for listening.